Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist and ichthyologist, and also I'm a PhD student. I specialise and study the evolution of Loricariidae catfishes, also known as plecos within the aquarium trade. So one of the biggest questions people ask maybe when they're starting to get into catfishes, starting to get into Loricariidae, is what is this whole L number system? Why are people using L and N numbers? Or most people focus on why is there a number when referring to different fishes, and it can get really confusing at times, especially when you're new, and it's a bit weird why these numbers even exist. Even maybe more seasoned fish keepers aren't actually particularly familiar with why the system exists, and maybe the more issues when it comes to the science of using this L number system. So what is the L number system? Actually there's two systems here. There's the L number itself and also the LDA number system. So the L number system comes from, I've written it down, so it's Stats magazine anyway, but it's actually like a Dye, Aquarium and Terrarium. I swear there was another one, but this is an Aquarium and Terrarium magazine that came up with the L number system. LDA number system is, it says according to Wikipedia that it's Das Aquarium. So I tried to look up what the actual names of the magazines were, not that they're really accessible in the UK and I assume the USA, because they are in German. And that's an interesting thing about the pleco or Loricariidae L number hobby in general, that there's a lot of German literature or maybe some Dutch literature on the topic. So what is this L number system? And that's the biggest question for a lot of people new to plecos, new to Loricariidae. So the L number system was created, it's said, because so many species were being found that weren't actually described and didn't have a scientific name, and that's generally the one sentence reason why. This isn't actually entirely correct. So Plecos gibiceps, which is the sailfin pleco, one of the common plecos, that actually has an L number, but it was scientifically described in something like 1850 or earlier. So it was described around 150 years earlier, then it was given an actual L number. So that sort of explanation doesn't make sense, and there's many examples of this. So it's not just Plecos gibiceps, so it's not just about that speed of discovery. It might just be maybe they couldn't match it to the scientific name. But it's difficult to say for those older ones, and the L number system only existed maybe in 70s onwards, maybe 80s, so obviously it's well out by time Plecos gibiceps was described. So generally it's used particularly for anything that wasn't described at the time or variants. So you'll frequently see different variants of the same species described as different L numbers rather than their scientific name. I think also people find scientific names a lot more complicated, or feel they're a lot more complicated than they actually are, because scientific names aren't as bad as, I would say, definitely the English language, and there's always a record of how scientific names change, the reasons for and such. So I'll get into that a bit later. But how many L numbers actually are there? There's over 520 names, and the LDA numbers I'm not entirely sure, but there's definitely not nearly as many. I think it's just over 100. So when you see L600, that is not a true L number. They haven't got that far up yet, and it's not like they're designating numbers for what hasn't been described yet. So let's get into sort of the more intricacies of this L number system. So it's kind of matched with some of the flaws. The L number system is polyphyletic in a way, so multiple species can have the same L number. L200 is a great example because it's both Balancistrus dermatoides and Hemiancistrus subviridis, which also, funnily enough, are both called green phantoms. You might see letters before L numbers, and sometimes people use this if it's to refer to different species, but this is not the true L number. It's just made up by some hobbyists and some trade sort of things, and it doesn't really represent anything. So that's quite often you'll see it with, I think it's L90, which is Panac bathyphyllus. So this is the smallest royal pleco, the smallest Panac, that only grows to 30 centimetres, but Panac shafari, that grows to 60 centimetre standard length. So that's another sort of, if you add the tail on maybe, or caudal fin, 90 centimetres. So it's a much bigger fish, and that I think gets L90C, whereas bathyphyllus is like L90A or B or something. So you'll frequently see a lot of fake L numbers as well, and that's quite reasonably common. So especially any letters, that's not a real L number, and that species might not even be represented by that L number. Some species get called an L number that they're not. So L144, so 144, is often referred to as the blue-eyed common bristlenose. It is not. L144 went extinct maybe 45 years ago. Extinct as in it was imported into trade. It was a much more dusky looking fish, and if you know anything about the genetics of these fishes, they don't just, it's not like you suddenly get golder ones in a way. This was a much more dusky fish, a very different fish. It was imported from Paraguay. We don't know what species it was. All it and its offspring were imported to Germany. They all died out. Doesn't exist. Parancistrus aurantiacus, the true fish, gets called, I think it's L67. L67 is actually a pseudancistrus that, as far as we know, doesn't turn gold. It's a totally different fish. I think it's Acanthicus adonis maybe gets given an L number that it is not. It's not the only example. There's so many of these fake L numbers. Like Pseudorhinepis guinebarbis gets called, I think it sometimes gets L95, but that is only for the undescribed orange coloured species, orange to certain parts of it. And you'll notice this L bit. What does this L refer to? L refers to Loricariidae. Loricariidae is a family that all plecos are within. And people say, oh, it's only for plecos, but what is a pleco? And that's another argument altogether. But it covers Ancistrus, which people are like, oh no, they're not pleco, they're bristlenose. Covers them. It covers, I think I'd assume some Loricariidae go in there. It definitely covers some Hyperptominae, I'm pretty sure. But it also covers, if it's going to cover Pseudorhinepis, and that's pineapple plecos, it's the whole of Loricariidae, whether it's an Ottosynchus or whiptail catfish, it covers the whole lot because that group is right outside. And this is kind of the problem with common names as well as the L number system. The other thing with the L number system is one species can have multiple L numbers, and sometimes there's not always a reason behind. My favourite example is, although there is potentially a phylogeographic, so it changes depending on locality, reason behind it. Gold nugget, so Parancistrus xanthellus has 4 L numbers and 1 LDA number. That doesn't represent the whole diversity of that species. So L18, L81 and L177 kind of represent juvenile variants, or some of the variants of the gold nugget, Parancistrus xanthellus, and it's not its all. And there's many intermediates as well. And there's also a green variant that looks like a Chrysolamus, like this one, but it's not. So it doesn't really help when people ask, what is L number is my gold nugget? Because it's like, the other thing is that these fishes as mature, L85 is the mature variant of L18, but does L18 like develop into any different variant than the other L numbers of xanthellus? No, because you can see like all the adults pretty much look the same. They lose their seams, they get smaller spots. Verde might be different because it's more of a green tone, but spotting and seams in most Loricariidae do fade. So don't rely on it, other than, I guess, the sunshine. Scopianancistrus aureatus, also known as the sun. So like sunny pleco, which sounds really silly compared to like sunshine, works a little bit better. Some common names are nicer than others, I definitely think. So that's kind of like some issues with the L number system. And it does get called semi-scientific. It's not scientific. It's a hobby naming system and has been started to use by scientists for undescribed species or when describing species. It's kind of helpful. I don't know if there's a real reason behind this, but associating the L number with the newly described species, and you'll see that with Balancistrus xanthellus, and that was about 10 years ago it was described, maybe 15 years ago. And anyone actually reads the original description or looked at websites around that time, L81 was actually forgotten to be included in that original description. So for years, websites had them as an SP of a different fish. They are the same species, it was just forgotten to be added. And it's not like you can't really say, oh, scientists should add it. A lot of scientific descriptions do not include common names or L numbers. If you go to some museums and you see Loricariidae there, they will probably not have their L number associated with them. So it's not really the most scientific. A lot of scientists are starting to use it to describe, to help identify specimens, but they are not. It's not scientific. There's no sort of scientific aspect to it. Why is it not scientific at all? Firstly, they do have a vague description, but it's not like a scientific description in the slightest. It needs to include a precise locality for a scientific description, very precise diagnosis, so why is it not the same as another species? And this is where the L number, the C number, CW number, LDA number system differs, is that it does describe variants. And you won't get that in scientific descriptions. They all have to be the same species or maybe a subspecies. We don't use subspecies as much anymore. So it doesn't, this diagnosis says why is this fish morphologically or even sometimes genetically different from another fish? Why is this valid as a different species? And realistically, these number systems are to describe variation. Or human views of variation rather than think of it in a more scientific format. Another thing which does appear in scientific literature is accessibility. It's really difficult to access stats descriptions. So it's not like you can say, oh, this is definitely this L number, because first you've got to be able to access that issue of the magazine. And some scientific descriptions are really bad, so tropical fish hobbyist, any of those, you almost have to give up if you're going to try and find a description on that. Sometimes you can, and I have accessed a few. Other old aquarium magazines did have scientific descriptions, so Scopenicistrus aureatus, Corridorus duplicaris, I think it is. So Hoplosoma duplicarum now. They were all described in hobbyist magazines and they can be really impossible to access. The other one is etiological exploration of freshwater. That's another difficult to access one. So the argument is pretty poor, I think. Well, my argument is pretty poor when saying about accessibility, because some journals are really difficult to access even with institutional access, which is like museums, universities and similar. So it's more on that diagnosis point that there's not a complete of this is why this is this and not that, but it doesn't really need it if they're describing variation between or just colour variation. It doesn't have to be that just because that L number is different, that they're different populations, they're just different colour variants or morphological variants. Good example might even be that L33, L333, L66. Which are potentially the same species. I think a few other Rio Xingu Hypancistrus are the same, and I also think the Colombian Venezuelan Rio Orinoco, Rio Ventura, I think it is, Hypancistrus, they're the same, and then the Xingu are another sort of group of their own same species. I think that's quite common with Hypancistrus. But it might explain why there's not been a scientific description. So the argument of them being about descriptions not coming out fast enough is a little bit more complex, I guess. So there's no doubt, if you're working taxonomy in phylogenetics or anything like that, taxonomy describing species is actually really time consuming, and this makes it particularly difficult to describe species at any speed. Some older descriptions are much more brief, but you wouldn't get away with peer review or getting it published so easily nowadays with that sort of level of description. And the other thing is availability of specimens, being able to access the specimens, import permits, stuff like that hinder scientific description. And this is why you might see so many more variants in the aquarium trade rather than scientifically described. And this is actually much more common than many think and is not exclusive to Loricariidae. Some might be in locations that aren't safe for scientists to go, and scientists have health and safety to think about. Wherever you're going on field work, you have to do so much health and safety, and if it's not a safe place to go, you're not going to go, or you're not going to be able to go. So it's not as simple as the scientists can't describe it fast enough, really. It's just about ability to describe species and to describe species of any speed. So accessibility of specimens is the main one. Museums do have amazing collections, and we should support museums in general, but also being able to access specimens. Education in taxonomy is another big one. In the UK, there is only around 3 or 4 courses that teach taxonomy, so that would be master's level you'd have to really do for educating taxonomy, and there's not really as many jobs. In other clades there might be, so botany, I guess, entomology, especially when it comes to pests and stuff. Yeah, anything that has an agricultural purpose, I guess, or health, so maybe bacteria and stuff, but their sort of taxonomy works very different. So it's not that simple, and a lot of people are doing it in their free time. It's a hobby in a way. So respect those people that are putting the time into describing species, and some might be amateurs and not even being, most people aren't even paid for their scientific descriptions, I guess. But this is why I kind of have an argument behind the L number system, because it's really difficult to get through with scientific descriptions in its current format. There is sort of issues with has been monophyletic, so if it's polyphyletic, but that's a whole other topic. So I'll probably end this video here. Thank you for watching. If you like my videos, please comment, like and subscribe. And if anyone has any potential articles for my website, that would be actually really helpful. And I'm happy to edit through anything, add any citations and such. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.